Okay, so now we'll take a look at the differences in MOS that ARNOR have undergone. I will load up their roster, although I will probably need to split theirs up into infantry, cavalry and archers because they have a rather large roster. So I will set them up and we'll take a little look at what the differences are. Okay, so we'll go through the ARNOR foot infantry contingent and their archers, and there are a few differences here, and we'll go through them as they come about, and there are some significant differences here actually. Here is probably where Arnall have become the strongest faction in MOS. Now it's not here, obviously the hobbitry and arms are still a relatively low tier unit, they're not really going to last very long, you're never really going to have the general in them either, it's just, they're the first ones on the list, so they're the first unit that I picked. They won't last very long, there's not really a great deal of difference here in terms of their functionality, they are still a low tier unit, which you will not really be using for anything other than buying yourself some time. The Arnall Militia is still a relatively good unit for a militia unit, but as I've said, the lower tier units, their survivability has increased, which means their usefulness as cannon fodder has also increased, but their overall effectiveness has been blunted pretty significantly, so at dealing damage they are not going to be particularly useful at all. The Arnall men-at-arms, now they will have changed in the sense that they are much better in terms of the defense, they will last longer, but again, like most units in MOS, they will no longer deal as much damage. They're the lowest tier, sort of heavier infantry unit that Arnor have. You might see these guys, but it's unlikely because of what is to come in Arnor's higher tier units. The first of the new infantry units that Arnor have are the Arnor infantry. Now, really, the differences here are that they are a sort of more heavily armoured variant of the Arnor men-at-arms. You're pretty likely to see these guys instead because they're no more expensive and they are just better in every way. They're more similar to the Gondor infantry, honestly. Like the Arnold men-at-arms have always been a little bit worse than the Gondor infantry. These guys, I think, are actually better. So now the Arnold infantry has gotten even more depth, and that's really the key to their newfound strength. The Arnold infantry, I would say, is a nice unit, but it's not the most important unit that Arnold have been given. But it is still a very nice unit to have. They have also been given a Spearman, which they sorely lacked in regular Third Age. It wasn't a huge loss for them because spears tend to be, I prefer pikes to spears in the original version of Third Age, but here, having spears is always nice because it means you have a more versatile unit. And the Arnold Spearmen are very, very good, of course, they're very heavily armoured, and they're another unit which just give Arnold a lot more strength in depth. They still have their pikemen, which is always nice. They have not got their armour on anymore, but that comes when you upgrade them instead now. Nonetheless, the Arnold Pikemen, still a good pike unit. Maybe not quite as good as some of the other pike units you can have, but they are still an exceptional unit to have in this very diverse roster of infantry that they now have. Really, though, the most significant addition is these guys, the dismounted Arnon Knights, and the reason for that is they are very, very good, a little bit worse than the dismounted Dunedain Knights, but they're only a little bit worse, and they are only 450 florins each. That makes them less expensive than a lot of factions, just regular infantry grunts, like Dale Swordsmen. They're around that sort of price, and yet they're so much better. And this is just where the balancing of this mod in multiplayer really comes into a bit of questioning, because what on earth are these guys doing for so cheap? Like, they are a very, very good unit. They will quite easily flatten most other lower tier units, and they will be able to stand toe to toe with the best infantry in the game for a lot less. So you're going to be seeing a lot of these guys if you play online on MOS, if you're against Arnor. And who can really blame them? The dismounted Arnor Knights, very, very nice unit indeed. They still have the Dunedain Knights. These guys are still expensive, but you can now have 4 before the price increases, which means that they too have gained a lot more value for money, and they are still as good as they always were. Very, very strong unit indeed. They also gain, well, I say gain, these are the battle-ready Dunedain, essentially, the Dunedain swords. They're pretty much the same as they were, 750 each. And you could have 4 before the price increases now, which is, it's one of those things where they've given Arnor so much value for money that they have become the best faction just because you can field so many. Actually, no, you can only have 2 of these before the price increases, but it feels like 4 because you can have Mercenaries, which are the same unit, only, well, they're the same. They're statistically the same, they're visually the same, they're just a different listed unit, and I assume that's because in the campaign these guys are recruited a little differently, but online, for multiplayer, they are virtually the same unit, and you can have 4 before the price increases, so again, you're going to have a very large contingent of these guys. And then you have the Northern Line Volunteers. They're a sword and shield infantry. The main difference between these guys and the Arnor infantry is they do more damage, but they're not as survivable. But other than that, you know, the amount of heavy infantry you have to pick from as Arnor is ridiculous. It is. It's a thing of it. You can't beat it really. Like as well as Arnor's Cav, which we'll get onto in a minute. You're just not really going to be able to get past them in online unless there are some pretty severe rules set on how much of each infantry unit Arnor are allowed to bring. Moving on to the archers, the Arnor archers, the low tier archers in this mod have been butchered. They are terrible now. They have very, very low missile damage. This is true for the Hobbit archers as well. Hobbit archers only have got 1 missile damage, so they are virtually useless. Even the Banderbrass archers have taken a very hefty nerf. They used to have a pretty high missile score, now they only have 2, so they are worthless. Really? All of these low tier archers? Not going to be much use at all. They're higher tier archers, however, that's a different story. The Dunedain Elite Rangers are just as good as the Elven Archers in this mod, and they are very, very good in melee as well. Nice bows as well. So, again, this is a unit which Arnor have, which really rounds them off into being the all-round best faction, because you may only be allowed 2 before the price increases. I think it's 2 anyway, it might be 3. But their missile damage is very, very good, and you're going to be able to pepper down the enemy with relative ease using these guys. And again, you still have the regular Dunedain Rangers. These guys have a missile score of 7. The Elite Rangers have slightly higher missile score. It's 9, I believe, which is very good for this mod. 7 is still very high as well. A little bit worse, obviously, than their Elite counterparts, but still a very, very good unit. We also have the Arnorian Heavy Archers. They too have got a missile damage score of 6, I believe, which is again slightly worse, but they are still a very decent unit. They are basically as good now as the Bardian Marksmen of Dale, which is, you know, it takes away Dale's advantage almost completely. And then we have the Hollow Steel Marksmen. These guys, of course, are a very, very good unit. They're basically a upgraded version of the Arnorian Heavies. They're a less in the unit, but they're more accurate, and they have 1 more missile damage at 7, and they have heavier armor, so they're much more useful in the skirmish. There is also another archer unit, which I did forget to actually bring, because it's at the end of the list. It's the Elven Rangers, and they are a small unit of 20 and 2 hit points, and they have, it feels like they're supposed to be a general unit because of that, but they are, you know, individually they can really lay down some damage, but there's not really enough of them to do so. I will bring them when I bring the Cav just in a minute so I can at least showcase them, but yeah, they're a unit which, you know, mixed in with other archers, they can be potentially pretty damaging, but there's not very many of them, so you do need to be careful. Right, so now I shall move on to showcasing the cavalry that Arnor have, and of course that was the area in which I was very complimentary of Arnor back in the vanilla faction overviews, because they were the best at heavy cavalry. So we'll have a look at what is different, or perhaps not so different there. Okay, so before we get on to the cavalry, I will just go through the units that I missed. Of course, these are the Elven Rangers, very small unit, but a very elite unit individually, doing a lot of damage with these guys, but the 2 hit points doesn't really save them in the skirmish because of how few of them there are, so their usefulness is really questionable. There is also these guys, the Ranger Volunteers. They're essentially the same as the Mercenary Dunedain Swords in that they are exactly the same as Dunedain Rangers. They just increase the amount that you're able to have on the field in multiplayer. Arnor also have a Trebuchet, which is always nice. Trebuchet is a very effective piece of siege equipment if used correctly. But now we'll move on to the cavalry, and there is actually no difference here really, and that means that Arnor are still very strong in the Cav department, because no one has really been able to surpass some of the Cav units that Arnor have to offer. Of course, the Arnor Sergeants are the sort of lower tier Arnor cavalry, but to call them low tier is to do them a bit of a disservice because of how elite they are. There is the Bodyguard Unit. You won't really be using the Bodyguard Unit an awful lot because, again, like Third Age bodyguards tend to not be quite so good in the sense that there are far less of them in the unit, and they don't really make up for that with hit points like Standard Medieval 2 does. There's also the Arnon Knights, again, very nice. You know, the dismounted variant is now the most significant change to Arnor in terms of the balance of how things work in multiplayer. So, you know, these guys on horseback are still as good as they always were, but of course the main event are the Dunedain Knights. I mean the Knights of Numerous, the mounted Dunedain Knights. Again, an extremely, extremely strong cavalry unit still. And they still rule the cavalry world, it must be said. But yeah, Arnor, the most significant changes are the fact that they have been given archers that are at least joint best in terms of the kingdoms of men, and their heavy infantry has surpassed everyone because of how much they can field. And that makes Arnor the best faction in MOS, in my opinion. But again, you know, the balancing is a little bit strange, so with custom rules, you can make it so that it is far more balanced. But yeah, Arnor. I would like to see a lot of these units in the reforged version, to be fair. Like the dismounted Arnall Knights, provided they balance them, are a good idea, as well as the Arnall Spearman, and the Hollow Steel Marksmen are a cool sounding unit as well. So all of these units could be a good thing for Arnor, provided they're balanced correctly, but yeah. Other than that, that's really all I have to say on Arnor. Who else will I do next? I think I'll move on to one of the Orc factions which has benefited a bit from this mod, and I think I'll do Gundabad next as far as MOS changes go, but we'll see, we'll see. But I hope to see you there for whichever faction is next.